Hi everyone, it's April and today I'm here to do my May wrap up. I read 9 books. Well, actually I read 8 books, DNF'd 1. Let's talk about the DNF first. Get it out of the way. I ended up DNFing The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Now, this is going to be very controversial and we're starting off on a controversial note, and that's okay. This is one of those books that plays with time. We meet Addie LaRue, who essentially made a deal with some sort of demon god person, and that deal allowed her to live forever completely of her own accord, but nobody remembers her. So as soon as she leaves someone's sight, they no longer remember her, and that's the way she's lived her life for centuries. Now, I will tell you that other than Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, I have mostly struggled with time stuff in books. So this might just be a situation where I did not get on with the concept. I found myself frequently questioning it and not believing in the time aspect of this. So for example, she would often spend evenings with a man, and they would remember her throughout the whole evening. But what about going to the bathroom? Like, didn't these guys ever go to the bathroom alone? So I just, and then when they got out of the bathroom, they would have seen her and been like, who are you? So there were just these questions that whirled around in my mind, and that stopped me from enjoying it. So I was like, okay, I gotta just put this down. So I DNF'd that book. Otherwise, you know what? I've had a pretty good reading month. There's only like 3, 4, and 5 stars that we're talking about here. So that's pretty lucky. I ended up giving 3 stars to The Lying Room by Nikki French. This was kindly sent to me by Brooke, and I so appreciated it. The Lying Room follows a woman who is having an affair. She's been married with children for many, many years. She decides to have an affair with her boss, and they have kind of an apartment together. It's really his apartment, and she just goes there a lot. She shows up one day for an arranged rendezvous, and she finds him dead on the floor. It's clear that he was murdered, and so she goes around the apartment cleaning up any sign that she was in the apartment. She doesn't report the body, she doesn't report the murder in any way, shape, or form to the police. And it's about her story. And, you know, there's so many stupid moves made in this book where you're just like, why are you doing this? She's not the most likable of characters. I would say she's okay, but wasn't rooting for her in a major way. So this book reminded me of another Nikki French book that I'd read called, I believe, Losing You. And they did very similar things where our main character has no time to relax. There's always someone asking something from them. And so you're literally watching the main character going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, and there's no time to just breathe and absorb things. In this case, she's absorbing that she covered up a murder, essentially. And I found that a little frustrating, if I'm being honest. The writing is always good because it's Nikki French, but that busyness I found a little frustrating, and it ended up a 3-star for me. It was a fun read. I will always read any Nikki French. Anything that they come out with, I will read it. Next is a horror book. Is it horror? Is it a thriller? I'm not sure. You tell me. This is The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. So in this book, we're following a therapist, and this therapist is going on a thread, like a Reddit thread, some sort of forum, and he's talking about the most horrible case that he had. And basically you read his posts. So at the start, he is explaining that he's a therapist, that he can't tell anybody about this horrible case that he had, but he needs to get it off his chest. So he changes all of their names and everything. He doesn't post as himself. I think he posts as anonymous or something along those lines, and he tells us the story, which is really fun. I think the start was fabulous. I thought this was going to be a 5-star read, and then it just kind of petered out over the course of the story. So in the story, he is telling his most heinous case of this patient of his who was admitted to a hospital that this guy worked at the age of 6 years old, and he had night terrors, and he ended up staying for years and years and years, and he's just kind of off on his own. Now he's like I think in his 30s or 20s, and he's off on his own, and it seems like there are a lot of deaths surrounding visiting this patient. And of course, our main therapist wants to get to the bottom of it and takes him on as a patient and all of that. So again, the beginning was really nerve-wracking. I think the lead up to meeting the patient was better than after meeting the patient. And that's a disappointment to me, which ended up landing at 3 stars. This is a short book. This is only 200 pages, and yet I found it long. So it ended up being 3. It was definitely entertaining. I would recommend it, but I wasn't blown away by it by any stretch of the imagination. The next book is one of those books that I should have known that it wouldn't be my thing. This is The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. So this follows a pool of water. In this pool of water, over a period of time, many people die. And yet, people are drawn to this pool of water because it can grant wishes, but at a price. So we follow a woman whose sister is living at their grandmother's house where they spent a lot of time in the summers. And she discovers that her sister has drowned in the pool. And this is not the first drowning in this pool. This pool is connected to that spring of waters that will grant wishes and take something in return. And she's trying to get to the bottom of it. We also go backwards in time with a woman who is dealing with infertility. All she wants is a baby. She's getting older, and she goes to the pool of water and asks for a baby and gets it. Gets a baby, but there's a price. There's always a price. I love her writing so much. I struggle with anything that's like about nymphs or mermaids, sirens, anything surrounding water and like like an evil character. I never like those stories, which is odd. Like, it's a weird thing to not really enjoy, but it's just my quirks, I suppose. But if you do like that, oh my gosh, read this book 100%, because I think you would very much enjoy this book. Yeah, so 3 stars to that. And now we're moving into my 4-star reads that I read in May. First up is The Magusties. I really enjoyed this book. I listened to it on audio, and this I think I heard about from Jean's Bookish Thoughts. And this follows a woman who is in a coma, and she's aware of her surroundings. She can't talk to anybody. She can't interact with anybody. Nobody really comes to visit her, but she's recalling the history of her life. She's revealing to the reader that her sister, who she was very close to, murdered her entire family by poisoning them at an event. And she also poisoned our main character. However, she survived and is in this coma because of the poisoning. I thought this was so good. It goes into the history of this family, and you find out why the sister poisoned everyone. I really loved discovering that, and you go into the history of this family and discover that, you know, they're not always lovely people. They're not always lovely people. And, you know, you deal with the dynamics between these 2 sisters, which I really loved. I just thought this was a wonderful book. I was riveted. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I really wanted to know why the sister did this. It's such a nice little twist on a thriller story. I absolutely loved it, and I'll definitely read more. I think this is by Tiffany Tsao. Absolutely adored it. Another book that I listened to on audio is an Oprah Winfrey book. It's called The Path Made Clear, and the tagline is Discovering Your Life's Direction and Purpose. I just love Oprah. I love especially listening to Oprah's books on audio because she narrates them herself, and that there's just something comforting about Oprah to me. I really look up to her. I always watched her show when I was young. My mom used to watch it and I would watch with her, and it was like doing that and just spending time with Oprah. I wouldn't say it's like spending time with a friend because Oprah's Oprah, so it's like spending time with a second mother. You know what I mean? And she does give so much good advice, and she is so vulnerable. She has a new book out that I'd really, really love to read as well about trauma, and I think it's called What Happened to You. I haven't dealt with a lot of trauma in my life, but I still think that I'd like to read it. So I'm on hold for that, the audio version of that in my library. I think I'm like really far down the list. Let me know in the comments below if you've read that. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Next is a book that honestly I gave 4 stars, but I'm sitting here wondering if I should have given it 5 stars. This is What Alice Forgot by Leanne Moriarty. This was wonderful. This is about a woman who is at a gym. She hits her head. She falls over, hits her head at the gym. And when she wakes up from this kind of, it's not a coma, but like a trauma to her head, she can't remember the last 10 years of her life. So she, in her mind, believes that she is happily married, that she's pregnant with her first child. In reality, she's separated. She has 3 children. And so she kind of has to deal with that. Also, she's really not talking to her sister, who she was incredibly close to, and she's trying to sort that out. This is such a beautiful story about the complexities of relationships, both romantic and, familial as well. It's also about how easy it is to slip into busyness in life and lose sight of what is important. It's very easy to do that, especially when you have kids. You can get into like, now we need to do this and that and routine. I get that it's very easy to do that and lose relationships. And this explores those relationships and Alice and rediscovering herself and her values. And I just loved this book. Like it also explores, I will say, miscarriage and infertility. And I thought it explored it incredibly well. Like, this made me feel known for miscarriage, for infertility, 100%. I really loved that aspect to it. It's funny because after I had my miscarriage, this has been on my shelves for a long time. A lot of people were like, just a warning, it does talk about that. But for me, and everyone's different, from me, exploring those themes after I've experienced it, especially with something that is not taboo, but not talked about still, really not talked about a lot, miscarriage and infertility as well. People get uncomfortable talking about it, and that's fine, but it was important for me after my miscarriage to talk about it. And it was important for me after my miscarriage to talk to people about it. And one of the ways I kind of talk to people is through books, and absolutely wonderful. So if you're like me and you do want to explore those themes in a book, to like sort through your own thoughts. Anyway, I'd recommend What Alice Forgot. Oh, it was so good, guys. I think I'm going to switch that to 5 stars because as I'm talking about it, I'm clearly gushing. The last 4-star book before we move on to my 5-star, I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir and gave it 4 stars. This was so much fun. In this book, we follow a man who is on a spaceship. He wakes up and discovers that all of his crewmates, it was a small team, but all of his crewmates are dead and he's the only one alive. And he's been in this deep sleep for a good long while and he has forgotten what he's doing. Like, he has to figure out that he's even on a spaceship, you know, like it's a deep forgetting. And what he learns fairly quickly is that he is on this spaceship to save Earth because Earth is in trouble. Everyone is going to die very soon. So he has to save Earth. And this was so enjoyable, so funny. And it's so funny because, like, this follows Ryland Grace, and he is a wonderful character in and of himself. Andy Weir also wrote The Martian, and in The Martian, Mark Watney has like the worst potty mouth in the world. I loved it. But in this book, Ryland is a teacher, like a high school teacher. And so he has these other, he'll say things like dang it and that kind of thing, where it's not a potty mouth in any way, shape, or form, but it's like, it's kind of quirky and funny the way that he speaks. I really love that. And he does meet someone along the way. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but their relationship, I am telling you, was so good. It was funny. It was twisty-turny. I learned a lot about science. And he writes it in such a way that really is accessible, because I am not a sciencey person whatsoever. But I love Andy Weir's writing so much. I just loved this book. 4 stars. Again, could have been a 5-star. Really close, like 4.5. I don't know. Maybe these two I need to like sit with more and think about. Maybe they'll move up to 5 stars because they were so good. Okay. Finally, the book I did give 5 stars was our book club book for Getting Hooga With It. Over on Patreon, I've got a little book club. I'm sure you guys know that. By now, we read A Keeper together by Graham Norton. Now, Graham Norton is this guy. You might recognize him because he has a like late night talk show where he interviews celebrities. He is hilarious. But in this book, I learned that he is also a gorgeous writer, incredibly deep. I loved every second of this book. This is, I would say, contemporary. It takes place in the 70s, I believe, and the present. So we follow Elizabeth, who goes back to Ireland after her mother dies. She is kind of sorting through her mother's things, and she stumbles upon a collection of letters from a certain someone, and those letters change everything. It changes so much about Elizabeth's understanding about herself and her identity and where she comes from. And she goes searching into the secrets of her mother's past, essentially. We also go, I think, 40 years back when her mother was younger and single and, you know, looking for love, and you follow her story. This, every single chapter, first of all, ended on a cliffhanger. Every single one. And you go back and forth in time. So you end on a cliffhanger in the past with her mother. You're like, oh my God, what happened? And you need to find out. And then you go into the present, and there's always a cliffhanger, which makes you flip the pages so darn fast. It was wonderful. I was riveted. I was a little bit scared at times, especially for her mother. If you know, you know. I cannot recommend this book enough. This is definitely going to be in my top books of 2021. And I want to read all and everything that Graham Norton comes out with. Like, he's just phenomenal. Phenomenal writing. So I hope that I have sold you on that book, because you will not regret it. You will not regret it. Like, if you like historical fiction, read this book. Lots of history about Ireland in the 70s. If you like contemporary books, read this book. If you like thrillers, read this book. It's just, okay. Read that book. Please do. Let me know in the comments below what the best book you read in May was. I'd love to know. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk with you soon. Bye!